Hey guys, Dev with Crime Hive, and we're going back to the Israelkeyes case. This is a serial killer, not as widely known as other serial killers, but very different than many other serial killers out there. And we're going to talk about in this video how his crimes went undetected for so long. And we're going to dig in. Before I do, again, just remember to subscribe to my channel, Crime Hive. You can hit the bell notification so you can get updated videos. And let's talk about this case. I've got a picture here of Israel. Not a lot of people still know really what he looks like or much about him, really. But I feel like he's starting to become more prolific as there's more reports and more evidence about him and what he did. So this is Israelkeyes. Things that we know about him, again, very meticulous, very calculated. He was not reckless until the end when he was ultimately captured. So one thing we know about him is that he studied other serial killers. He was fascinated by Ted Bundy, but he wanted to create his own name as a serial killer. Now, very different than other killers, he actually didn't want notoriety. He didn't want to be known. He didn't want to be in media reports. That was part of the reason we don't know a lot of information about his cases. He didn't want to tell the FBI because he didn't want it to go out to other reports and media, and he was just so private. And so really fascinating. We know he learned from other serial killers, read several books. He wasn't very much into technology. He's been considered analog type of person, where one of the things that he did to carry out these crimes was he used a lot of cash. So again, that's another method of being undetected. Didn't like using credit cards or things like that. There is some evidence that he used cards. He just had to in some cases when he was booking into hotels and renting cars and things like that, but he was still very calculated. We're going to talk about some of these things. And here, for one example here, I just have a map of the US just to show you some of the crazy things he would do when he would set out on these kills, essentially. So when he killed people, one thing that's very unique about him as well is he had delayed gratification. He could wait several years. So we know that he would bury these kill kits that have equipment and money and things to help dismember a body and things like that. He would put in various places around the US, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But what I'm pointing out here is one of the things he would do is, he lived in Alaska a lot of the time when he was committing these murders. Also lived in Washington. What he would do is he would take a one-way flight somewhere. So I'm just giving you an example. Let's say he went from Washington to, Texas, Austin, Texas. He would fly out there, get a rental car, and then he would drive hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles in that rental car to another location. So let's say he went over to, Illinois, went to Chicago. He would drive all the way to Chicago. There he would commit a crime. He would access buried kill kits in these various locations around the US, use that equipment, including guns, ammo, tape, things to bind people with, like rope and zip ties, all that kind of stuff. So he would never have evidence on him. So he would travel through airports, didn't have to take a gun with him because he had guns buried across various locations in the US. He would commit these crimes very quickly, and then he would flee very quickly. Now, these people that he chose were very random. Again, very calculated in how he was going to commit this murder, but the people were very random. He was strategic in the fact that he liked to choose very rural areas, forests, hiking trails, out in the open, country. He'd find these locations and pick his victims. And it was just random. There was no connection to these victims, again, making it very difficult for investigators to track the connection. There just wasn't a connection with his victims. So, he would then kill somebody. Let's say he killed somebody in Illinois, and then he would drive this rental car again somewhere, maybe Montana, drop the car off, and then maybe do another one-way flight back to Washington. So just to give you an example. So that's how strategic he was, and that's very unique compared to other killers out there. So let's talk a little bit about this. People are wondering, okay, what are these kill kits? He would take these buckets, right, waterproof buckets, and he would fill them with equipment. Cash was a big thing. He had cash dispersed all over. He'd have weapons. And when we talk about weapons, this is very unique because a lot of people are wondering, okay, he had these guns, aren't they registered to him? Can't these potentially be traced back to him. He did have some guns that were registered to him, but I would imagine, based on how secretive he was, that he had other sources, black market type of resources, to where he could purchase things under the table with cash, and that it would never be traced to him. When we're talking about guns, one thing I want to point out that's actually pretty common in the criminal underworld nowadays is people are basically making ghost guns. They're called ghost guns, and they can essentially skirt the system by purchasing small gun parts, and then they essentially put their own gun together. Doesn't have a serial number. It's not recorded by law enforcement. They have no idea where this gun came from. And what we're finding, there is legislation on this. They're trying to combat this issue, but what's happening is people are buying all these pieces, and then typically the lower receiver that has, that contains the trigger guard, where the magazine is inserted, that is typically where the serial number is. And so if somebody buys that piece, a lower receiver, it is considered a firearm. Now, people have figured out a way to get around that, where they're selling a lower receiver that's not complete. It might be 80% complete. Then the person has to complete that to make it into a working gun. So very crazy, very interesting, very common with these ghost guns, and it's possible he may have utilized that in his kill kits. So another crazy thing that we know was in his kill kits were he had Drano and lye in these buckets. And if you guys aren't familiar with lye, here's an example. The Mexican mafia, or drug cartels, I should say, drug cartels. Let me move this over here. So drug cartels, time-tested method of them to get rid of bodies, okay? There is someone here named Santiago. I'm not going to get much into it, but basically he was on the FBI's most wanted drug dealer list, and he had dissolved more than 300 bodies in 9 years. So if you guys are familiar, it is a common amongst these underground criminals to get rid of bodies, and Israel knew this. Drano contains lye, so he had Drano and lye. He said he also used the Drano to pour on the bodies to prevent DNA recognition, because you wouldn't be able to gather DNA. I mean, there's bleach, there's all these chemicals in it that are going to get rid of fingerprint evidence and DNA, things like that. So that was something he utilized. Now, another thing that he did that was just really interesting is he was very strategic about where he placed these bodies, and really how he committed these murders. Sometimes he would put them in, chop them into pieces and basically bury their body in areas like deep water. So we're talking right here. We know that he may be associated with killing a couple people and putting their bodies out in Lake Crescent, which is an Olympic National Park in Washington. He lived in Washington, so he mentioned these lakes. We know he had a boat, and he would go out on boating trips in various areas. So investigators think that he may have dumped these bodies in very deep lakes, and we're talking about Lake Crescent here. Some of these lakes are so deep that it's very difficult for investigators to retrieve evidence. Now, just showing you this little article here, they're getting better with technology, with underwater sonar mapping devices and things like that, but it's still very difficult to find a body in these just deep lakes. So just to give you an idea, a lot of divers, a lot of people out there don't go much further than 100 feet, and places like Lake Crescent are deeper than 600 feet. Some believe it's more in some pockets. There's very deep lakes out there, not just Lake Crescent, but we know that he utilized this because it was he would weight down these bodies. Very difficult for people to find any evidence of this. This is an example of a missing person that was at Lake Crescent that was missing, and people just could not figure out where she was. Even with all the technology we have nowadays, it can be very difficult. So just to give you an idea, again, world record holder for a scuba diver. This guy basically went 1,090 feet approximately, which is crazy. But here's the interesting thing about it. It took him 12 minutes to get to that depth, but on the way up, it took about 15 hours Okay, that's just going down to the depths of about 1,090 feet and then taking 15 hours to go back up. So if you're looking for someone at a very deep lake, you can't just come back up the water as a scuba diver. You have to, there's a period of time where you have to wait it out, because if you come up too quickly, you can get, you know, this decompression sickness, and other things can happen that can even kill you. So you got to be very careful. Divers have to be very careful when going into these deep waters. So anyway, just wanted to give you guys that information. Hope you found it helpful. Hopefully you've got a better understanding of Israel Keyes and how different he was from other serial killers out there. Definitely going to be doing more videos on him and other cases. Check out my other videos. This is Dev with Crime Hive, and we'll see you guys in another video. Take care.